I want to save you hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially even millions of dollars, by explaining to you the most important element between budgeting and forecasting. Okay, we want to do a quick compare and contrast and see how we can save you money this year. Let's first talk about budgeting. When you hear the word budgeting, what should you be thinking about? Well, you got to think about strategy. You got to think about quantitative strategy. Let me just put it that way. So budgeting is actually the strategic planning of your company's finances across critical areas. So to do this, you need to draw up a budget, right? You got to have a budget. And what happens here is that in a budget, you outline your business's projected cash flow, estimated revenue, and expenses for daily operations over a specific period. I want to really insist on that. We are speaking about daily operation. So a budget should be as granular as possible, should be as detailed as possible, okay? Now there are many upsides to budgeting, but the most important one is that you have here a surefire way to score idea viability. In other words, you want to make sure that whatever you put forward or whatever one of your team members puts forward is viable economically, is viable operationally, and is viable also in terms of team dynamics. Okay, so before creating a financial budget, you could find it challenging to visualize, let's say, your revenue plans and business expenses. However, as you prepare a detailed financial outline, you know what is achievable, you know what is not, and most importantly, you know how to navigate the uncertainty that actually connects the two scenarios. Okay, and because that uncertainty allows you to really make any needed iterations. Because see, when you think about budgeting, you are thinking about a process of trial and error. You're thinking about a process of let's try this, let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, let's really adjust. Okay, and so because revenue and expenses are not entirely predictable, budgets are usually short term, usually on an annual basis. You will never see a budget for 5 years unless you are in a specific industry. Budgets are usually for 1 month, for 1 quarter, for 6 months, or maximum for 1 year. So if you are trying to really save money, or you want to save time and resources doing your budgeting, let's talk about the different types of budget that you have on the market. Because see, the kind of budgets you are actually thinking about building, or the kind of budget you're thinking about actually navigating, is going to play an important role in terms of the time and resources you allocate to the budgeting phase. Okay, so depending on your business model, you can adopt one of six budgeting techniques. So I'm going to put this on the screen so that every time you know what I'm talking about. First of all, you have incremental budgeting. Next, you have value proposition budgeting. Next, you have zero-based budgeting. Next, you have cash flow budgeting. Next, you have activity-based budgeting. And finally, you have surplus budgeting. Let's quickly talk about each of them in more detail. First, we have incremental budgeting. This is where you add or subtract a percentage from your previous budget, right? So you are actually doing things incrementally. Add or subtract a percentage from your previous budget. You can say, for instance, you know what? For this year budget, we are actually adding 10% more to everything, to revenue and sales, and to revenue and expense items. So that's for incremental budgeting. You also have value proposition budgeting. This is where you ensure every item in the budget creates value for your business. In other words, if something is not creating value, you just toss it. You just toss it out. No time to waste here. You also have zero-based budgeting. This is when you need to cut down costs and justify all business expenses. So when it comes to zero-based budgeting, senior management is really keen on making sure that every expense is actually adding value to the business. You also have cash flow budgeting. So a cash flow budget accounts for potential lines of credit for increased business cash flow. So this has a business credit component. You also have activity based budgeting. This process allows you to map out a specific volume of inputs needed to achieve your projected business output. So you see a correlation between input and output right off the bat. And finally, you have surplus budgeting. So surplus budgeting allows you to account for excess revenue. So if you are in a business model, if you have a business model that allows you to generate excess revenue, you can think about surplus budgeting. So let me talk to you now about how do you prepare a budget for your small business this year. How do you go about doing it in a very cost effective way and also in a very easy way? Okay. Now, many small businesses have lean accounting and finance teams. In other words, they don't have a lot of folks in house. This means also that the business owner takes on planning the company's expenses and drawing up a budget, right? Now, how do you pull through? How do you actually make sure that you have a viable budget? You have a decent budget that really corresponds to the best practices in the industry. Now, while budgeting tools make things easier, the hack is to really understand how the overall budgeting process works. And when it comes to budgeting, there are three important questions you always have to keep in mind. Otherwise, you're just going to lose, you're going to waste a lot of time and a lot of resources. The first thing you want to pay attention to is you want to ask yourself, what is my business's current state? Are you in a situation of excess? Are you in a situation of deficit? Or are you maintaining? Do you have a break even role, a break even profile? And what is the most important goal we want to achieve now? Because see, a budget has to be strategic, right? So you do not draw up a budget just because you want to do something. No, it has to be part of a process. And finally, the third question you want to ask here is that what is the big picture? What is the big picture that we were trying to really get to? That's important from a strategic point of view, but also from a scalability point of view. So when you provide practical answers to these questions, it will narrow your focus. And now you have the proper context for decision making. Next, you want to follow a few simple steps to prepare your small business budget. First, you want to figure out actually how many income sources you have and how much your business makes. So here I'm speaking about revenue. I'm speaking about liquidity. I'm speaking about cash inflows. You want to record your fixed, variable, and one-off expenses. That's going to help you big time. And you want to add up everything to know how business cash flow and profit actually mesh together. And now your budget should include a realistic cash flow projection, estimated revenue and expenses, cash reserves, and also debt reduction. In case you have some outstanding loan, you want to make sure that you are servicing the debt properly. So I just explained to you what business budgeting really is. Let's talk about forecasting now. So because this whole conversation is actually a contrast between budgeting and forecasting. So what is forecasting? Let's quickly talk about that. Now, forecasting is a little bit different. And forecasting, by the way, doesn't matter if you have a small business or a large enterprise, you can benefit from forecasting actually equally. So financial forecasting involves a high level projection of future business outcomes based on informed opinions and existing data. So what happens here is that when it comes to forecasting, you're basically navigating two worlds: the world of existing data and the second world of informed opinions. Okay, so you are extrapolating, you are assuming. When you think about financial forecasting, you are going to think about assumption. Those two words are really like they go hand in hand. Okay, you cannot have a budget without assumptions. That's really important. Now, to create a forecast, you want to look beyond direct factors that influence your business, and you want to consider macroeconomic factors like the social and political influences that can sway your market. So if you want to do maybe a forecasting this year, for instance, you might want to think about the current state of the economy, but also the ambience, if you will, in DC. in terms of Congress, in terms of the presidency, all that kind of stuff. Okay, especially if you are in quote unquote sensitive industries. Now, while typically a budget is short term, financial forecasting happens both short term and long term, which takes more time. Also, your company might need to create multiple forecasts to have the most accurate predictions of its business conditions. Okay, so just think about that. A budget is usually short term in nature, one month, one quarter. Okay, one could be 1 year, 6 months here and there, but a forecast can be 5 years, 10 years, really depending on the goal that you're trying to reach. So that's important. And what I want to say here is that you want to really revisit your forecast every now and then. Let me talk to you about the types of forecasting you need to think about this year. If you're interested in forecasting, financial forecasting, you want to understand what works, what doesn't work. First of all, you have qualitative forecasting, and then you have quantitative forecasting. So, qualitative forecasting is sometimes called judgment forecasting. So you do have the ability to get things done really fast, okay? But you are basing things on your on quality judgment, on your assumption, okay? And quantitative forecasting is more numbers driven. Let me break down even further for you. So in judgment forecasting, aka qualitative forecasting, your company will rely on its knowledge of the market's landscape and the informed opinion of its target audience for financial projections. Okay. Now, of course, instincts can be wrong, so you should only use this method when you do not have historical data for decision making. In other words, you want to trust your gut when you have no idea, no archive, no history. For example, if you just launched a new product in a new market, there is little or no actual data to rely on. Next, you have quantitative forecasting. So quantitative forecasting refers to data-backed decision predictions, data-backed business predictions, not decision, business predictions. So here you have a process that involves gathering and analyzing volumes of data to discover economic patterns, market conditions, industry trends, and consumer behaviors, and actually leveraging these data sets to predict changes and opportunities for your company. So that's really convoluted, but it's really also involved. Okay, now many businesses merge judgment and quantitative forecasting to determine future cost, plan the company's trajectory, and forecast sales and market demand. So you have a situation where all those two processes are merging. So if you want to prepare a forecast for your small business, you got to really have a clear idea about the strategy you want to follow. You want to really follow, because every company is different, every niche is different, every industry is different. Okay, so you want to make sure that the industry you are choosing. I mean, now you're choosing the budgeting or the forecasting you're choosing, not the budgeting, the forecasting process you're choosing fits with your industry. So the first thing you want to do here is to examine your existing business records from month to month. Sometimes you might even want to do this like from week to week. The whole idea here is what? The whole idea here is to get as much granularity as possible to know exactly what works and what doesn't work, to know what has worked in the past and what could work in the future, right? I mean, forecasting or budgeting for that matter actually instill a layer of trial and error. So when I speak about you examining your existing business records from month to month, you want to pay attention to your income, to your cash flow, to your expenses, and finally to your revenue. And so after examining your existing business records from month to month, you want to define the goals and objectives of your forecast. I mean, your forecast probably has specific goals, and you got to have a clear idea what those goals are, and you want to choose a method of forecasting. Remember, You only have two methods of forecasting: quantitative or qualitative forecasting. So now you could actually do a merger, but make sure that the merger actually serves your company's interest. Okay. And the third thing you want to do here, the fourth thing you want to do, because the first thing is examining your existing business records from month to month. The second thing is defining the goals and objectives of your forecast. Third, choose the method of forecasting. And fourth, you want to prepare the financial statements. Again, those are what? Forecasted financial statements. They are projected financial statements. Okay. So when I speak about your financial statements, usually you have four, but for purposes of financial forecasting, only three are sort of are needed. You have balance sheet, cash flow statements, and income statements. The fourth financial statement is called statement of owner's equity, but you don't really need it when it comes to forecasting, because the bottom line is that forecasting is actually more about the business, not about the equity within the business. You want to make a mental note to update your revenue forecast and sales projections regularly. So, when you think about budgeting versus forecasting, I just explained to you what budgeting is, what forecasting is. Now, let's talk about what the key differences are between budgeting and forecasting. Okay, now at first glance, budgeting and forecasting appear very similar, right? However, a thorough analysis reveals that several differences exist between the two concepts, including the fact that a budget outlines planned business expenses and revenue over a period. Forecasting is a well thought out projection of business outcomes for a future period. A budget is usually prepared for the short term, while the forecasting process happens in the short and long term. And compared to a forecast, a budget is more static. Financial forecasts undergo several adjustments as the business situation and economic conditions change. So, this is something you have to really think about. Now, should you really create a budget or a forecast for your business? It really depends on the situation that your business is in right now. Budgeting and forecasting come together to define the financial plan for small but also enterprise companies. But which one should you prioritize this year? Like you, many small business owners ask the same question. It's actually tempting to jump into creating a budget first. After all, you need to hit the ground rolling and plan out expenses and income for the month, quarter, or year. But wait, take a pause. Without a forecast, you would end up spending resources or endeavors that are not aligned with your overall financial goals, your overall business financial goals. So you want to start with a forecast. That's really what it is. When you have a realistic financial projections, you can prepare a budget to meet your different goals. Okay, that will help you, especially in the long run, if you are dealing with different sets of stakeholders. The way you deal, for instance, the way you deal with banks is not the same way you deal with VC firms or even private investors or even angel investors for that matter. So the takeaway here is that I explained to you into this conversation what budgeting is, what forecasting is, and the key differences between budgeting and forecasting. Thank you so much. God bless you. I will see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.